Ramon, I know we've covered this story loads, mate, but we've got to talk about it again. Loot Freely House is finally up to be sold. So you may recall last year, in 2022 and in 2020, the ANC had judgments raised against it for failing to pay for party campaigns and party posters and usual shit that they do in Durban. And basically, the company wanted to get paid, so they took the ANC to court for 102 million, which is what they owed the banners. Now, in 2022, Fikile Mbalula came out and said, there's no ways there's even a contract there. There's no ways the ANC would spend 102 million. And it's now just gone before the Supreme Court of Appeal. And the Supreme Court of Appeal says, and I quote, Fikile Mbalula's utterances were utterly untenable, which is judge speak for Fikile Mbalula's talking a giant load of shit. So he's basically said, pay up by Friday, or we're confiscating Loot Freely House.
But what is interesting about the story is that someone in the ANC treated this like a tender from any other municipality that the ANC governs. But for the first time, it was ANC money that was due, not municipality money or SOE money or taxpayers' money generally. This is the first time that there has been affirmative action in the ANC with ANC money because they gave instruction to an Indian guy to do the election campaign. Not a white guy, an Indian guy. An Indian guy, there's one thing we know about Indians, don't fuck with payments, guys. Like, Indians really like to get paid. I know that sounds racist, but it's actually a good trait. So it's positive racism. But the ANC has done to themselves what they do to every other entity in the world ever. And it's good to see it, fire back in their faces.
Last October 2022, the Treasurer General, Paul Mashatile, who's now obviously the Deputy President, he came out and said, for many reasons, it is unfortunate. The reality is that the ANC has been struggling to maintain its operations at current levels. And we see this right up and down the country. Where it's municipalities, they just overemploy people. They give them above inflation pay rises. But when the ANC does it in their own party, and they can't just go to taxpayers and say, give us more money, and tax the living shit out of you and bankrupt the living crap out of a municipality, the ANC defaults, and they just don't pay their staff, which is why it landed up in the Labour Court dispute last year. Now, coming back to the original story, this is exactly what happened with Loot Freely House. These Muppets went out and basically did 102 million's worth of posters in KZN, because that's what they do. And obviously, Loot Freely House was the surety. But Ramon, you know what could happen? I mean, remember, Loot Freely House is named after Arthur Luthuli, who's there as one of their struggle icons, and is really important to the ANC. You would assume that they would never let anybody get their hands on this iconic building ever. Well, strangely, the ANC actually has a billionaire who heads it. And to a billionaire, this could just be a tax write-off. But isn't it interesting that the billionaire president, the guy who was made by ANC policies, basically says, yeah, it's your problem. And now Loot Freely House is being expropriated without compensation.
I mean, that's the problem when you're a ChatGPT president, right? You don't actually have your own thoughts. You rely solely on prompts, and no doubt there was no prompts that said, try pay off the ANC debt, which makes me believe a lot of these people in the ANC don't give a shit at all about the actual ANC. Like, at all. There's no gala dinner to fundraise for this. There's no huge fundraising initiative to pay for salaries. It's just sleepwalking into oblivion. At the end of the day, I just don't understand how any movement in this country can still get 40% of the vote when the people in that very movement don't give a shit about the movement itself, right? People vote for the ANC, like, as the slogan, as the banner, as the logo, but the people behind the logo don't give a shit about the logo either. It just makes no sense. What's no sense?
You know what does make sense? Is that Mr. Radams, the CEO of Eziluweni, basically says, you know what we need to do? We need to move into Loot Freely House and turn it into our head office. He is quoted as saying, why sell it where we can simply move in and turn it into our head office? I mean, Based, mate, based. Because you know what the ANC should have learned by the whole Phoenix debacle? The Indians don't fuck around, mate. They should know this. They were in power with the Guptas. Like, if you literally don't pay these guys, they will expropriate the living shit out of your stuff. And guess what? They are. Now, we did a whole video about possibly we should just call this like Zilly House, and we still think that would be far more amusing. But I'll go for it. It's now going to be their head office. I'm all for it. What I really want to know, though, Ramon, is did they get the arms cash as part of the deal?
Well, I did email Mr. Adams a while ago. No answer, I'm afraid to say. But assuming he does get into the head office of Luthuli House, where on earth will Fikile Mbalula bloviate from? Because, I mean, that's the only place he's at as Secretary General of the ANC. So he'll need to find another stage somewhere else and talk about why blacks should only vote for the ANC. How can't you? I mean, we made you, didn't we?
Well, certainly made ANC ministers. But that being said, I'm sure there's a travelling circus somewhere around town. I'm sure he can always join there in his yellow jumpsuit, and people would love to laugh, point, have a little giggle at his expense. But with all that being said, ladies and gentlemen, great news. Loot Freely House has finally been expropriated without compensation, and it couldn't have happened to a nicer lot.